In the year 1847, along a quiet countryside road in Kentucky, there stood a beautiful yet strangely isolated inn known as the Millbrook Inn. It was not grand, like the city hotels, nor heavily guarded like the estates of wealthy landowners. Instead, it stood quietly between thick trees and open fields, its warm candlelight glowing softly through tall windows every evening. To travelers passing through the region, it looked like comfort, a safe haven before the darkness of rural roads took over the night. The inn was owned by four women known as the Cunningham Sisters. Their names were Elizabeth, Margaret, Clara, and Rose. Each sister carried a distinct presence. Elizabeth, the eldest, moved with calm authority and rarely showed emotion. Margaret had a voice so soothing it felt almost hypnotic. Clara spoke little but observed everything. And Rose, the youngest, had a gentle smile that made strangers feel instantly welcome. Word of their hospitality spread quickly. Businessmen, horse traders, land investors, and wandering gentlemen often chose to stay at Millbrook Inn rather than risk traveling through the dark countryside after sunset. The sisters offered warm meals, generous wine, and evenings filled with soft piano music. Guests described the atmosphere as charming, peaceful, and strangely intimate. But over time, whispers began to circulate. Some travelers who checked into the inn were never seen leaving. At first, no one found this unusual. The roads of Kentucky in the 1840s were dangerous. Bandits, illness, and accidents were common explanations. Families assumed their loved ones had simply continued their journeys. Yet patterns slowly began to form. A merchant from Ohio arrived with heavy bags of coin and fine fabrics. He was last seen dining with the sisters. He never returned home. A land investor from Tennessee mentioned the beauty of the inn in his final letter. A wealthy widower seeking a new beginning checked in one autumn evening. He vanished without a trace. Still, there was no proof, no witnesses, only absence. The sisters continued their routine. The candles glowed each evening. Music drifted into the night air. Laughter echoed within the wooden walls. Behind the inn, beyond a small garden and a short fence, the soil looked uneven, as if recently disturbed. Few questioned it, and sometimes, deep after midnight, when guests had retired and the piano had gone silent, a faint sound could be heard beyond the house. Not wind, not animals, but something slower, something heavier. The quiet, steady sound of digging. The rumors did not spread all at once. They moved quietly, like smoke through open windows, barely noticeable at first. A missing traveler here, a delayed return there. In a time when communication was slow and records were poorly kept, disappearance was not always alarming. But by the winter of 1848, too many names had been spoken in uneasy conversations. Families began arriving in nearby towns asking questions. A brother searching for his merchant sibling. A business partner looking for a man who never reached Louisville. A mother carrying the last letter her son had written. A letter describing the comfort of a charming inn run by four refined sisters. Each story ended the same way. Millbrook Inn, the Cunningham sisters always had an answer prepared. The guest had left before sunrise. He seemed in a hurry. He mentioned changing routes. They spoke calmly, confidently, even sympathetically. Their composure never cracked. Elizabeth handled most of the questioning. Margaret would offer tea to worried relatives. Clara stood silently in the background, watching every reaction. And Rose? She maintained her soft smile, though her eyes no longer seemed as warm. Still, no authority could act without evidence. The inn continued operating as usual. Stagecoaches still stopped at dusk. Wealthy travelers still entered through the polished wooden doors. Candlelight dinners continued. Music played. Wine was poured generously. Yet something had changed. Some locals noticed that the sisters had begun favoring certain guests. Those who appeared prosperous, those traveling alone, those who carried visible valuables. These guests often received private dinners, extra attention, invitations to remain longer. One former stable boy later claimed he saw something strange one night. He had been sent to lock the barn doors when he noticed Clara and Elizabeth carrying what looked like a heavy bundle toward the back of the property. It was wrapped tightly in dark fabric. He heard no voices, no struggle, only the sound of something being dragged across dirt. He said he froze in fear and never spoke of it again. Behind the inn, the disturbed earth expanded slowly over time. Small mounds blended into the natural landscape. Rain flattened the soil. Grass attempted to grow over secrets it did not understand. Then one spring morning after heavy rainfall, something surfaced. A piece of fabric, dark, torn, unnatural against the mud. A local farmer passing by noticed it first. Curious, he stepped closer and pushed aside the wet soil with his boot. What he uncovered would begin unraveling everything, because beneath the earth, just inches below the surface, lay something that could no longer remain hidden. The farmer did not expect to find anything more than discarded cloth, but as he knelt and pulled gently at the fabric, the soil shifted unnaturally. The ground felt loose, hollow beneath the surface. A foul odor rose into the damp spring air, sharp and unmistakable. He stumbled back. Within minutes, word spread through the nearby road. 2 more men arrived with shovels. What began as curiosity quickly turned into horror. As they dug deeper, the outline of a human arm emerged from the mud, pale, lifeless, partially wrapped in decayed fabric. The digging stopped. Silence replaced breath. Then someone ran to alert the local authorities. By late afternoon, a small crowd had gathered behind Millbrook Inn. The Cunningham Sisters stood at a distance, their expressions controlled, unreadable. Elizabeth spoke firmly, insisting it must be an old burial site from years past. Margaret placed a hand over her chest in visible distress. Clara's eyes scanned the crowd. Rose stood still, almost frozen. But the ground told a different story. Sheriff Thomas Whitaker arrived before sunset. He ordered a full excavation of the disturbed area. As more soil was removed, another body was uncovered, then another, and another. Some were buried shallow, others slightly deeper. Most were wrapped in fabric or stripped of identifying belongings. Coins, watches, rings, gone. The sheriff counted carefully as each grave revealed itself. By nightfall, there were 7. The next day, 12. Within a week, the number had reached 23. The excavation continued under tense silence. Families from surrounding towns began arriving, hoping and fearing recognition. Clothing scraps were identified. Personal items were matched. Grief turned into rage. When the digging finally stopped, the total stunned the entire county. 43 graves, 43 bodies buried behind Millbrook Inn. The news spread across Kentucky like wildfire. Newspapers described it as one of the darkest discoveries in the state's history. The once charming inn was sealed. The Cunningham Sisters were placed under arrest. Yet even as chains were fastened around their wrists, the sisters maintained their composure. Elizabeth denied everything. Margaret wept but said nothing incriminating. Clara refused to speak. Rose trembled, though whether from fear or shock no one could tell. The question echoed through every courtroom hallway and newspaper headline. How had 4 women managed to bury 43 men without anyone truly seeing? And more importantly, had they acted alone? The arrests of the Cunningham sisters sent shockwaves across Kentucky. Crowds gathered outside the county jail, desperate to catch a glimpse of the women who now stood accused of burying 43 men behind their own inn. Some shouted in anger. Others stared in disbelief. The image of 4 refined, soft-spoken sisters did not match the horror uncovered beneath their garden. Inside the jail, the sisters were separated. Elizabeth remained composed during questioning. She insisted the bodies had been placed there long before they owned the property. She spoke clearly, confidently, never raising her voice. According to her, Millbrook Inn had been purchased only a few years earlier, and whatever secrets the land held were not theirs. Margaret appeared more fragile. She wept during interrogation, claiming she knew nothing of graves or missing travelers. She described herself as a simple hostess who cooked meals and entertained guests with music. Her trembling voice almost convinced some deputies of her innocence. Clara, however, refused to answer most questions. She watched the sheriff carefully, her silence more unsettling than any confession. And Rose, the youngest, seemed visibly shaken. At times she appeared ready to speak, only to fall quiet when her sisters were mentioned. As investigations continued, authorities searched every corner of the inn. In guest rooms they found trunks containing clothing that did not belong to the sisters. In a locked cabinet they discovered watches, rings, and small personal valuables. Enough items to suggest robbery, but not enough to prove murder. There were no signed confessions. No direct witnesses to any killing. The medical examinations offered limited clarity. Many of the bodies were too decomposed to determine exact causes of death. Some showed signs consistent with poisoning. Others bore fractures that could have resulted from blunt force. But time had erased certainty. The courtroom proceedings drew massive attention. Reporters filled benches. Citizens waited outside for verdict rumors. Prosecutors argued that the pattern was undeniable. Wealthy men arrived alone and vanished. Their belongings were found. Their bodies lay behind the inn. The defense countered that no one had seen the sisters commit a crime. No murder weapon was conclusively tied to them. And in an era lacking modern forensic science, suspicion was not proof. Weeks passed. Tension grew heavier with every session. And as the trial unfolded, a deeper question began to surface among observers. What if the story was even darker than anyone imagined? Because whispers suggested the sisters may not have acted alone. Some believed a hidden accomplice moved in the shadows. Someone strong enough to dig. Someone unseen. And perhaps someone still free. As the trial continued, the courtroom grew more divided. Some believed the evidence, though incomplete, painted a clear picture of calculated murder. Others insisted the case was built on fear, assumption, and circumstantial proof. Without a confession, without a direct witness, doubt lingered like a shadow over every argument. Then a new testimony shifted the atmosphere entirely. A former carriage driver came forward. He claimed that on 2 separate occasions, he had delivered wealthy passengers to Millbrook Inn late at night. Both men had been visibly intoxicated when he left them in the care of the sisters. According to him, Elizabeth personally escorted them inside, while Clara locked the doors behind them. The driver admitted he returned once the following morning to retrieve a forgotten satchel. He knocked, but no one answered. He said he heard movement inside, something heavy being dragged across wooden floors, yet the door remained closed. The defense quickly challenged his credibility. Why had he waited so long to speak? Why no earlier report? The driver hesitated. He confessed he feared retaliation. The sisters, he said, had a presence that unsettled him. Another revelation followed. Among the recovered personal belongings was a pocket journal belonging to a traveling businessman. Though several pages were torn, one remaining entry caught attention. It mentioned feeling unusually drowsy after drinking wine served by Margaret. The final line read, "I trust these ladies completely." The prosecution suggested poisoning. A local physician testified that certain plant extracts common in the region could induce paralysis without immediate visible signs. If administered carefully, a victim could appear asleep, or worse. Yet still, nothing directly tied the sisters to the act itself. Behind the scenes, investigators searched deeper into the property's past ownership. Records revealed the land had indeed belonged to another family decades earlier, but no cemetery had ever been documented there. Public opinion began to fracture. Some newspapers labeled the sisters as cold, methodical killers who exploited charm as a weapon. Others argued that hysteria had transformed rumor into conviction. Inside their cell, the sisters rarely spoke to one another. Witnesses claimed Elizabeth remained calm, reading quietly. Margaret prayed. Clara stared through the small barred window. Rose wept at night. And as the final arguments approached, one haunting possibility remained. If even one grave predated their ownership, then how many secrets truly belonged to them? And how many belonged to the land itself? As the final days of the trial approached, tension inside the courthouse became almost unbearable. Spectators packed the benches before sunrise, desperate to witness what many believed would be a historic verdict. Outside, crowds gathered in restless clusters, debating guilt and innocence as if the sisters' fate belonged to the entire state of Kentucky. The prosecution delivered its closing argument with force. 43 graves, dozens of missing men, personal valuables recovered from inside the inn, a pattern too consistent to ignore. They argued that the sisters had used charm as camouflage, wine as a weapon, and isolation as their advantage. According to them, this was not random tragedy. It was deliberate design. The defense responded with calm precision. There was no eyewitness to a single murder. No clear cause of death established for most of the bodies. No proven murder weapon. Suspicion, they insisted, was not justice. In an era without modern forensic science, fear could easily replace fact. When the jury finally withdrew to deliberate, the silence inside the courtroom felt heavier than chains. Hours passed. Elizabeth remained composed, hands folded in her lap. Margaret's lips moved in silent prayer. Clara's gaze never shifted from the jury door. Rose trembled, her face pale beneath the dim light. By evening, the jury returned. The verdict shocked many. Due to insufficient direct evidence linking the sisters to the murders, the court could not convict them on all counts. Some lesser charges related to theft and unlawful possession of property were upheld, but the accusation of orchestrating 43 murders remained legally unproven. Gasps filled the room. Outside, anger erupted. Many believed justice had failed. Others insisted the law had simply followed its limits. The Cunningham sisters were eventually released after serving limited sentences related to property crimes. Millbrook Inn, however, never reopened. The building stood abandoned for years, its windows broken, its halls silent. Locals claimed strange sounds echoed from the empty structure at night. Some swore they heard faint piano music drifting through the trees. Others reported the sensation of being watched when walking near the old burial ground. Over time, the inn decayed. Storms damaged its roof. Fires were rumored to have consumed parts of it. Eventually, little remained but foundation stones and disturbed earth. But the story refused to disappear. Were the sisters brilliant criminals who escaped full justice? Or were they victims of mass hysteria, blamed for horrors that time could no longer explain? 43 graves were real. 43 bodies were uncovered. Yet even now, history cannot fully answer the most chilling question of all. What truly happened inside Millbrook Inn after midnight? Decades passed, and Millbrook Inn became little more than a local legend whispered around fireplaces and at town gatherings. Children were warned never to wander near the ruins, and travelers passing through Kentucky were told to steer clear of the property, where 43 men had met their mysterious fate. Yet the story never faded. Occasionally, historians and curious adventurers would attempt to uncover more evidence. Some claimed to find fragments of old journals, pieces of clothing, and coins buried in the soil. Others reported strange sensations, sudden chills, the sound of footsteps, faint whispers carried on the wind. Even in broad daylight, the site felt unnervingly alive, as if it still remembered the horrors that had occurred. Local folklore began to grow. Some insisted the spirits of the missing men lingered, wandering the nearby woods at night. Others believed the sisters themselves, or some remnant of them, haunted the inn. Tales spoke of shadowy figures glimpsed behind trees, and flickering candlelight seen in empty windows. Travelers who ignored the warnings often returned with stories of feeling an invisible presence watching them, of hearing music where none should have been. Scholars debated the veracity of the events. Was it truly a tale of cunning murderers, or a cautionary legend amplified by fear and rumor? The lack of solid records left the story open to speculation, but the evidence uncovered, 43 graves, personal items, and eyewitness accounts, confirmed that something terrible had indeed happened. Over the years, the name Millbrook Inn became synonymous with dark secrets and chilling disappearances. Tourists, ghost hunters, and paranormal enthusiasts still visit the area, hoping to catch a glimpse of the past. They come with cameras, EMF detectors, and notebooks. Yet most leave with stories of unease rather than proof. Even modern residents report inexplicable occurrences near the old property. Strange lights, sudden cold drafts, and the feeling of unseen eyes. Some say the spirits of the Cunningham sisters, or their victims, cannot rest, forever tied to the land they once controlled. Others claim the earth itself holds the memories of what happened there, refusing to let the story fade into history. And so, the legend of the 43 graves at Millbrook Inn endures. A tale of beauty and charm, masking unimaginable darkness, of innocence lost, and of questions that may never be answered. The truth, like the shadows that linger around the ruins, remains elusive. And perhaps that is why the story continues to captivate and horrify, generation after generation. Years later, curious historians and paranormal investigators returned to the ruins of Millbrook Inn. The foundation had crumbled, trees had grown over the disturbed earth, and the once grand structure had been reduced to fragments. Yet the stories persisted, and a strange energy seemed to linger. Visitors reported sudden chills in the air, inexplicable noises echoing from nowhere, and shadows moving just beyond their vision. Some claim to feel the presence of the Cunningham Sisters, or perhaps the lost men who never left the inn alive. Even during daylight, the soil where the graves were discovered seemed unnaturally cold, as though the earth itself remembered the horrors buried within. Artifacts occasionally surfaced: coins, fragments of clothing, remnants of journals, each a small, haunting reminder of what had occurred. Scholars debated whether the events were true crime or legend, but the evidence of 43 graves confirmed that something dreadful had indeed transpired. Locals continued to warn travelers. "Do not stray near Millbrook," they would say. "The land holds memories that are not meant for the living." Some ghost hunters claimed to record faint piano music or whispers carried by the wind, and several reported sensing invisible hands, sudden temperature drops, or an overwhelming feeling of being watched. Even now, the story remains alive. The inn is gone, but the legend endures. 43 graves, 43 lives taken, and a mystery that will never fully reveal itself. Those who study the story, visit the site, or recount the tale to others feel the same chill that first swept through Millbrook Inn in 1847. The land, the ruins, and the shadows all seem to agree on one undeniable truth: some darkness never fades, and some stories are never truly over.